Good day to teachers and teacher trainees. My name is Isora Enriquez Ofarril, teacher educator from Enrique José Varona University of Pedagogical Sciences. First of all, I want to thank the British Council for the opportunity of sharing my views on the teaching of productive skills, and also Alan Mackenzie from UK for allowing me to share these views, this presentation with you. In today's presentation, I will be unfolding the learning cycle for productive skills. This will be the first video of 3 videos that we will be showing afterwards. So the aim of the presentation today is to look at the general features of the learning cycle for teaching, speaking, and writing. And we need to start by explaining or giving let's say, a definition of what we understand by learning cycle. And we are following Sergio Font's definition that states that it is a structural didactic model that organizes the teaching learning process in a series of stages who are presented in a succession of cycles for the gradual development of communicative competence, that is, transforming linguistic forms, linguistic functions, discourse, social-cultural information into communicative competence. But that is a gradual process. So once we understand what we mean by learning cycle, we're sharing with you the learning cycle that we have adopted, that we are using in Cuba at the moment as part of curriculum renewal. There are many, or there are different learning cycles. And in previous presentations, also facilitated by the British Council, you got acquainted with other learning cycles. But the learning cycle that I'm sharing with you today is the one that have been, let's say, created in Cuba, adapted to the conditions, to the Cuban context. So first, we have the initial communicative practice, that is, students and teachers work together so as to brainstorm, so as to activate previous knowledge on certain aspects, on the aspects that we presented next, that will be presented in the next stage. And once the teachers and students realize that they do not know exactly how to continue with the new content, it's the moment to present the new information, the new linguistic content, or the new communicative function. But this is communicative language teaching. So the center of attention are the communicative functions. Of course, to transform this content into communicative competence, we need practice. We need to practice. So we go from controlled practice to guided practice to integrated communicative practice, that is, from control to a process which is freer. But in our model, in our cycle, we, let's say, finish with creative practice. It doesn't mean that we finish, because it's a cycle. So again, we go to initial communicative competence or initial communicative practice to begin a new series of stages. Next, we are presenting you this table, this chart. So I want you now to think of the presentation delivered by Professor Alan Mackenzie. So he presented the production process for both writing and speaking. But now we have in one section of the table, we have the learning cycle. So you will have to think for just 1 or 2 seconds on how you can match these stages of the learning cycle with the production process. I hope that you have been able to match at least one or two. So we are going to continue, and here we have, I am presenting how I have matched the learning cycle to the production process presented by Professor Alan Mackenzie. So in this initial communicative competence, we have mainly fluency activities because the objective is to help students use the language according to the situations presented by the teacher. And once the teacher and the students realize that they cannot produce anymore because they do not have the knowledge of the new content, the teacher then organizes the presentation and analysis of the new content. And at this point, the teacher should use authentic materials. He models this new content or this new situation. And of course, at this moment, accuracy and of course, modeling are very important. We need to continue because we now need to practice. But the first practice is controlled practice. It focuses on form and meaning, but mainly on form. Therefore, accuracy, modeling, and scaffolding. Scaffolding, it means helping learners, giving learners different ways to understand and practice. So it's time now to continue practicing because we need to have plenty of practice, but we go on to guided practice. Again, scaffolding is very important. And in this moment, as part of this practice, we can provide opportunities for using nonverbal communication because nonverbal forms are really very important when communicating because all our body communicates. As we continue, we need to integrate different activities. We need to integrate skills in the type of practice that we call integrated communicative practice. And they are aiming mainly at fluency. And we just continue with creative practice. Creative practice is the practice that we usually do out of class with community-based activities, problem-solving activities, and project works. They simulate real life, and if possible, if you can take the students to participate in real life activities where they can use the language. So we are going to continue now with another productive skills, writing. So here we are presenting the writing process. It's important to teach writing as a process, not just asking the students for the final product, but helping the students to go through the writing process. Therefore, we first need pre-writing activities to generate activities, because if you do not have ideas in your mind to write about, it is very difficult to do so. So after we have generated a number of ideas, then we begin writing the different drafts, the different versions of our product, of our text. Once we have produced a number of drafts, it's time to revise, let's say, the draft that we have developed so far. And it's the process of revising and editing, checking spelling mistakes, checking accuracy in general terms. Once you edit and rewrite your text, it's time for publishing, for sharing the final product with other readers, with other students' readers, with the rest of the students in class or in the school. It would depend on the type of publishing activity that the teacher designs for the students. So here, as we did, with speaking, let's see how we can pair the production process with the writing learning cycle. So generated ideas is a kind of fluency because this you do not concentrate on form, you do not concentrate on accuracy, but you just try to produce, to write as much as comes to your mind. So it's time to help students generate ideas. Think about all the possible ideas. Brainstorm ideas. Listen to texts or read articles that would help them generate ideas to write about. It's my suggestion to present a model text that would be a sample text of the type of text the students have to write for the students. And then it is also useful to have a guiding writing practice in which you model and you scaffold that is, you help students, you guide the students towards the type of text that they are going to write, maybe completion exercises, that those are really very useful. Drafting, yes, you pair it with fluency because then you start writing what you have generated, but then you start to organize your ideas in a coherent text. Revising is a process of scaffolding because you share your writing with other students, with the teacher, with other student readers, right? So they all help you, or they all help the students to correct and to produce a better text. Editing, of course, is checking accuracy, checking coherence and cohesion. So, as you see, what Professor Alan McKenzie presented can be paired to our learning cycle. Then it's now time to explain, I think, what I mean by activity. In the last years, a number of authors prefer to refer to tasks, but activity is, let's say, the more general term for what we do in class. So the definition that I am sharing with you is that an activity is a didactic unit to be done in or outside the classroom, and its objective is to help learners develop communicative competence. Of course, you develop communicative competence after you go through the process that we explained before, through the gradual process of transforming linguistic forms, communicative functions, social-cultural content into communicative competence. Of course, an activity must involve learners interactively so that also they could also interact with the teacher and with the teaching aids. When designing a learning activity, it's important to consider the context, that is the scenario, the instructions or the orders that you give the students, and the procedures. You have to explain the procedure that for some authors like Juan Carlos Vega, that's the body. So you have guiding questions. You may have also role play cards. You can include pictures, maps, dialogues. We are just summarizing what we have seen in this presentation, and I just want to highlight that we are referring in these presentations to speaking and writing as an end. That is, writing as skill, not speaking and writing as a means, as the types of activities that we use to practice linguistic forms or other linguistic components. All right? So I hope that you have enjoyed the session and that this session, I hope it can be useful for you. So thank you. So I need to, this is the bibliography that I have consulted mainly I couldn't write all the sources that I have consulted, but here we have the basic ones that we consulted for this presentation. Thank you very much, and see you in another session.